Let's start first of all then with this threat from Alistair Jack, the Scotland Secretary, around blocking the gender recognition reform bill and prevent it from gaining royal assent, which is unprecedented, is it not?
Yes, I mean this is all very new, but Westminster has already started rattling its sabre over it. So earlier in the week, Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch had written to Nicola Sturgeon with concerns about the DRR, saying that the legislation would have effect around the UK because it's not contained to Scotland. Then we've had last night Alistair Jack very strongly hinting that the UK government might use its powers to block the bill, going for royal assent. If Westminster feels that there are conflicts with the Equality Act. Now, the Scotland Act does allow for the UK government to have the power to block a bill passed by the Scottish Parliament. And if that was used, you can see the narrative that would prompt for independent supporters. It would be seen as a highly, highly provocative move. The SNP would certainly view it that way, Scottish voters would as well. I think it would probably take a quite implausible deal of cynicism to think that this was Nicola Sturgeon's long game or her end goal. I mean, she certainly doesn't shy away from a battle with Westminster, and this could be politically useful for her. But I also think that there's a strong sense from the SNP that they would just like this debate to be settled because it's dragged on for so many years now and it has been so incredibly divisive in Scottish public debate.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about Nicola Sturgeon, because she is a shrewd operator. She must have been aware of the difficulties, because it has been years that this has been discussed since it was in the SNP manifesto. And it has, as you say, come with warnings from the UK government actually quite repeatedly. They're not the only ones, incidentally, but quite repeatedly about their concerns about it. Those were concerns that were raised by Scottish Conservatives as well, kind of almost on behalf of the Westminster government, it felt like at times.
Yes, I mean, the discussion has certainly been interesting. It was a key SNP manifesto pledge as far back as 2015, 2016. It's something that the Scottish Greens have pushed repeatedly as well. When the SNP and the Scottish Greens formed an alliance at Holyrood, this was one of the key negotiating issues for the Scottish Greens. But it does feel like, despite the long-running debate around this, that for some Scottish MSPs, they've only really sort of clocked onto the issues and the concerns that have been raised by some groups really in the last few weeks. Some of the amendments that have been raised are issues that have only been discussed in the last few weeks. But with regards to Nicola Sturgeon herself and to the SNP, yes, I mean, they absolutely knew that this was a possibility. And I'm sure it's something that they're going to come out swinging against.
Yeah. In terms of the legislation itself, and you mentioned there, the SNP just kind of wanting this to be settled, Scottish Government just wanting this to kind of move past. I wonder how realistic that is. We saw the protests yesterday after the legislation was voted in by the Scottish Parliament, and ongoing concerns, I suppose, kind of on so many sides of this discussion about what happens next. Is it clear what does happen next? Will there be challenges, for example? Is this actually just the beginning of the next chapter?
The dust is definitely not settled. Yesterday, when the vote occurred, it was sort of framed as that being the closing of the book on this issue, which I think is very, very naive. I think it says only just the opening of the next chapter. I think we can expect to see legal challenges. I think we can expect to see the feminist voices that have been challenging this continuing to be extremely vocal over the coming months, over the coming years, as the effect of the changes play out.
And that's interesting, Catrina, the kind of effects of it, because some of it feels kind of still up for grabs, a little unknown, actually. So if I can ask, what rights are acquired with a gender recognition certificate? And within that, one sort of question that I've been trying to find the answer to, maybe you have it, is how it will be, I suppose, recognised. Who has to recognise a gender recognition certificate that will be sort of easier to acquire under this bill? Because, for example, is there a distinction between a prison, that's been the focus of one of the main arguments by campaigners, that biologically male prisoners could move into female prisons. So do public institutions like prisons face different implementation rules to private organisations, say in total contrast, sports teams, for example? Are there kind of limits on who has to accept a gender recognition certificate?
No, a gender recognition certificate is universally recognised. It's a legal document that has to be accepted. Um, for supporters of the changes, this is just a very simple streamlining of an existing process. So the ultimate result is the same. The gender recognition certificate itself doesn't change. What's changed is how a trans person would go about obtaining a gender recognition certificate. So under the new legislation, there's no requirement for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. So the process is demedicalised. It also reduces the length of time that someone has to live in their required gender from 2 years down to 3 months. The Scottish Government says that there are safeguards in place for this. We don't yet know what the finer details of that will be, but to make a false declaration would be a criminal offence. What the issue is for feminist groups and for women who have concerns is that this isn't about extending the rights of trans people. It's, as I say, making the process of obtaining a gender recognition certificate a simpler one. But for opponents, a concern is that a GRC gives trans people the protected characteristic of sex as it applies in the Equality Act, and that's where conflicts occur. But you mentioned prisons there. There are already male-bodied people in female prisons at the moment. So that wouldn't be a change. Some of the concerns that women have are already in existence. They're already happening. But it's issues about clashes within the Equality Act as we move forward that are some of the major concerns.